In 2006, crack coaching units were banished from digital existence for reasons unknown. These coaches promptly escaped from a fully featured franchise mode to the Wishlist underground. Today, still wanted by the Madden community, they survive as a feature of mystery. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the full coaching staff. All right, guys, welcome back, and today we finally see the return to my Madden 20 CFM wish list. I know it's been a long while, and that's been for a couple of different reasons. One, I've been doing a lot to focus on both of my franchise series, and in between those, I just don't get a lot of time to focus on other things, but the reality of that is also that when I have had the time, I haven't been spending it working on this, which is on me, and I do apologize for that. But then the other thing is that with what we're going to be talking about today, it's been one of the tougher things for me to mock up or kind of build when it comes to these wish list items. Obviously, with the vast majority of stuff that I present and that I think came through really well in the first two parts of this was that I try to do it in a way that explains not only what I want in the game, but how I'd like it to function and work. And with this, it's been quite a bit harder just because of how expansive things could be and how many different elements within the mode it could touch. So trying to find a balance between presenting something that isn't crazy complicated, but also has plenty of layers of depth is why this one has taken a bit longer for me to dive into and attack. But as you've already seen, I am referring to full coaching staffs. And full coaching staffs is going to consistently be my #1 want in franchise mode because of what I just mentioned. I've said it before, and I'm really not embellishing at all when I say that there is damn near unlimited possibilities of what you can do and have coaching staffs affect within franchise. It's one of those things that, in my opinion, should be a foundational feature of any football franchise mode that almost everything is built around and interacts with, and the fact that it's something that still hasn't managed to make its way into the game or even really have any kind of impact at all after all these years is really disappointing. And because of that, this is going to be a video that is far more wish listy than the others, in that what's going to be included here is likely going to be far more expansive and require far more than what is capable in a year's time. But if there was ever a feature that you were going to basically kind of forget about everything else and just go all in on, this would definitely be it, in my opinion. But anyways, we're going to get right into things. And when I first started laying things out, I kept coming to basically 3 themes or pillars that I felt epitomize and embody what coaching staffs should represent, and essentially the 3 pillars that I would build coaching staffs around. And those pillars are going to be preparation, development, and identity. And my main goal here was to focus on those 3 things. And as we go along, you're going to notice a lot of what I talk about comes back to either one or multiple of those pillars. So we're going to start here with the basic framework of how coaches would be set up. And to do that, basically the idea is to use a 4-tier level system to separate coaches into the type of coach they are. You could also use a rating system like you do with players, but I think this way just keeps things more simple and easy to understand. So starting here at level 1, which is going to be labeled as entry level, and these are basically going to be either brand new coaches or coaches that really aren't ever going to be more than a position coach. So this is going to be a mix of coaches like Kellen Moore, who was just in his first year as an NFL coach as the quarterbacks coach in Dallas, which is now held by John Kitna, whose upcoming year will be his first in the NFL as a coach. And then you're also going to have guys like Bob Wiley, who has basically been an offensive line coach for the entirety of his football coaching career. Then moving to level 2, which is labeled as mid-level, and these are going to again be mainly position coaches, but these are also going to be your up-and-coming or potential coordinator candidates, or guys that can fill either of those roles but aren't necessarily ready or capable of being a head coach. Basically, it's going to be your top tier position coaches and your lower end coordinators. Then moving to level 3, which is high level, and it's basically the same thing as level 2, but with head coaches and coordinators rather than position coaches and coordinators. And this would basically be for guys that have established themselves as being strictly coordinators and possible head coach candidates, but kind of above being a position coach any longer. Someone like Norv Turner is who immediately comes to mind here. And then lastly is going to be level 4, and this is going to be a somewhat exclusive club, which is why it's labeled as elite. And it's basically going to be guys that are only going to be head coaches. So your guys like Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, John Gruden, Mike Tomlin's probably in that category at this point. So if you hit the off season and one of these guys is on the market, you're not going to be able to even offer them a position coach or coordinator job. And that's something the older Maddens actually used to do, where you go to hire a guy and the position option would be just grayed out out with head coach because that's all he would accept and that's all that you could offer him. So that would basically be how the spectrum and hierarchy of coaches would be handled. But then the question then becomes, what do those levels or tiers do? And to answer that, we're going to use a system reminiscent of a fan favorite in NCAA 14 and basically use a very similar skill tree or perk-like system for coaches. And the idea is that as a coach progresses, he's going to unlock or have the ability to unlock skills or perks that improve and shape the kind of coach he is. And those skills and perks are going to change based on each level or tier that they come from. So at tier 1, the skills or perks would be largely based around affecting a specific position group or maybe a specific attribute. And then as you climb in tiers, those skills and perks are going to broaden and be more powerful and have more impact either on one side of the ball or even for the entire team. So when we look at perks and what those might look like, a tier 1 perk might be something like a specific attribute upgrade for a certain position to emulate that coach's ability to teach a certain intangible. So when you use a skill point, no matter what archetype you select for that position, you're guaranteed to upgrade that attribute. And this is actually something you could even take a step further and have additional tiers or levels to the perks as well, where the lower end of this perk guarantees a +1 while the upper end guarantees a +2. You could also have another perk that comes with a skill point XP discount so that players from their position group gain skill points faster. Moving to the next tier, you could have a perk that allows you to prep for 2 concepts each week instead of just 1. So rather than a position group getting a boost for 1 concept, they're getting it for 2. You could also take the same approach as the first perk I mentioned and have this perk be a specific boost to a specific concept. And then again, you can layer onto this by maybe having the second level of this perk increase the amount that players are boosted. So instead of just a +1 or a +2, maybe that's doubled or something along those lines. On to tier 3, you could have something like double practice XP. And again, the lower or basic level of that perk could be double practice XP for a position group, while the next level encompasses an entire side of the ball. And I know so far that I've mentioned almost exclusively things like position groups or sides of the ball, but you could also have any of these apply to a different kind of group as well, such as players with 3 or less years experience to emulate a coach that's great with young players or something like that. And then that kind of creates a really unique dynamic when looking for these coaches. And then lastly, for tier 4, you could have something that reveals a player's dev trait immediately. Obviously, this is something that is already part of the game currently, but if dev trait was ever going to be something that was hidden, this would be something that I think would work well as a high-level perk. Another alternative could be allowing for you to see a rookie prospect's dev trait when scouting, but only if they're a scheme fit. So as you can see here, we're already hitting on all 3 of those pillars that I mentioned. You have perks that affect the preparation and game prep side of things, and then you also have perks that affect the way players develop. And this is just one or a couple of different ideas for each tier. Ideally, you'd have a bunch of different perks per tier, and then with each coach having a unique set of those perks, you're giving each coach an identity that another coach might not have, which is that 3rd pillar. And when you do that, you start to add personality to the process. And when you're searching for coaches, you're weighing different things, and it makes it a much more engaging and interesting process. The next thing I'm going to talk about is scheme or archetype prioritization. Now, I'm not really sure how unpopular an opinion this might be, but I actually really like the restrictions that were put in place this year for scheme fits. That being said, I do feel that it was probably too restrictive in that it didn't allow for you to account for multiple archetypes for coaches. So that's what this would aim to remedy. The example I always use for this is Andy Reid and the Chiefs. Andy Reid's scheme calls for a West Coast quarterback because before this year, the Chiefs had Alex Smith for 5 years, but Patrick Mahomes clearly isn't going to be your typical West Coast quarterback, and I don't think it really matters what kind of quarterback Andy Reid has, they're going to be better with him. So rather than having very specific scheme fits, I would change that more to what I would call archetype prioritization, where each position's archetype is going to have its own level of fit with a given coach. Now, what this is going to do is pretty much eliminate those generic scheme tags of vertical zone run or multiple power run, and basically break outside of that box and put that scheme more on the coach rather than this detached generic standard put in place, which is the way I really feel like things should work. So again, here we're going to be using a 4-tier scale to determine how well a player fits a coach's scheme, and that in turn is going to dictate what kind of boost he sees in XP. So starting at the top is going to be your ideal scheme fit, and basically that's going to work exactly how it does currently, and the players that are ideal scheme fits are going to be the ones that receive the largest boost boost in XP. Moving down to good is where things will change from the current system. Players that are considered good scheme fits are also going to receive a boost when earning XP. It's not going to be nearly as high as ideal, but it's still going to be something. And what this is going to do is get away from that extreme restriction that is currently in place. The restriction is still going to be there, but it's going to be based more on the coach than that generic scheme. One place this is a bigger issue is at wide receiver and cornerback, where more often than not, you're going to have a wider range of player types. And under the current system, it only really pays to have one type of player. And whether you're Hugh Jackson or Andy Reid, that type of player is going to be the same, and that boost is also going to be the same. So this opens the door for coaches to run similar schemes, but have a drastically different output when it comes to what kind of players they prefer. Moving down to what is essentially the middle tier, and that's going to be normal. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It's not really good or bad. It just is what it is. No boost, no penalty, just normal. And then we get to the final one, which is going to be poor. And this would basically be used to indicate the type of player a coach doesn't want. So a steadfast 3-4 coach isn't going to ever be wanting a 4-3 style linebacker at outside linebacker. And if a player is a poor scheme fit for a coach, he's actually going to receive a penalty to his XP. That doesn't mean that he's not going to gain or is going to lose XP. It just means similar to how a player with good or ideal gains XP at a higher than normal rate, a player with poor is going to earn XP at a less than normal rate. I always think it's important to have that balance between positive and negative so that there's always rewards and consequences to the actions and decisions you make. So again, here we are really hitting both the development and identity pillars hard. And really what this is aiming to do is open up schemes a bit and allow for more than one archetype per position. And rather than coaches being boxed into one of 7 offensive or 6 defensive schemes, each coach has their own unique preferences that can range from a guy like Andy Reid basically having ideal no matter what the quarterback type is, to another coach maybe only having one ideal fit with the rest being normal. And this would change how you not only build your roster, but also how you hire your coach, because you'd be locked into their preferences. So like I said, this opens things up a little bit while still maintaining that positive impact that the restrictions implemented this year brought. So moving along, the next 2 things are going to stick mainly to that identity pillar, because I feel like that pillar is most important when it comes to playing the CPU. And this is something that has long been a problem when it comes to Madden as a whole and franchise mode specifically. And that problem is that pretty much every team or every game you play feels the same, whether you're playing a Mike Tomlin or a Chip Kelly or a Hugh Jackson or an Andy Reid led team. It feels like every team is pulling from that same small box of play calling and decision making, and it's part of what makes the gameplay aspect of franchise mode such a monotonous experience at times. You don't ever get that experience where you face somebody like the Steelers and they come out and throw the ball 50 times and go for 2 just because, and then the next week you face the Ravens and they come out and run it 40 times because of Lamar Jackson. That identity just isn't there. So to try and remedy that, I think the best avenue to take would be to give traits to each coach similar to what you see done with players. And the goal of these traits would be to help push towards having more of that identity so that they better represent their real life counterparts. So looking at these examples, you're going to see that they mostly revolve around play calling. And basically when looking at a head coach, if he retains play calling on a side of the ball, then that side of the ball is going to follow his traits, while if he defers that play calling, then the traits of his coordinator will end up taking precedent. And most of these are pretty straightforward. Passing and rushing preference would ideally have an effect on play calling. Run to pass ratio is the same type of thing. Options there would be heavy run, run first, balanced, pass first, and pass heavy. And again, ideally this is going to affect play calling and help differentiate teams and coaches. Moving to the defensive side, it's the same concept there. You have things like coverage preference and blitz tendency. And again, this is just to try and break away from that mold of every coach and team feeling the same, regardless of who their coach is or who's on their team. And then the last big thing I want to talk about here is playbooks. And the idea here would be to take the same approach as I went through with scheme fits and archetypes and try to break out of that restriction and allow for a lot more freedom. So basically the idea would be that the coach playbooks as you know them would be gone, and rather than having a specific KC Andy Reid or Seattle Pete Carroll playbook that is the same in season 30 as it is in season 1, basically every coach would essentially have a custom playbook that could have plays and formations added to it. And how that would be handled is that during the off season you'd have a task or a stage before the next season started to install new plays and or formations. And the basic idea of that that process would be that in this task, you'd be presented with a group of packages to choose from. So maybe you get to the off season and there's a zone read package or an I formation package that you can add to your playbook. This would also give you an opportunity to remove things from your playbook that you didn't use or didn't want to use. So let's use the Ravens this year as an example. You have Joe Flacco at quarterback, pure pocket passer, no need whatsoever for quarterback running plays. And then the draft comes around and you take Lamar Jackson. All of a sudden, you have this new dynamic that you need to start adding to your offense, and this would aim to try and replicate that in a realistic manner. Same goes for the other side of the coin, where maybe 10 seasons down the line, you trade Lamar Jackson and draft the next Peyton Manning. Your offense has to change, and being able to accommodate that in a more thoughtful and interesting manner than simply switching from Carolina's playbook to New England's playbook is something that I think would add a lot to the experience and allow for a lot more layers like playbook knowledge to be added down the road. And then one last smaller thing I wanted to hit on was game prep. Something I like to see with the gameplay side of things is having game prep rely more around risk reward when it came to choosing what to prepare. As it currently stands, I feel like it's kind of backwards, where you choose to prep a certain concept to beat another, and the reward for that is a boost whenever you run that concept rather than when you see that concept that you're preparing to stop. So what I'd like to see is a system where you prepare for certain things, and doing so gives you a boost when your players recognize those things, but it also leaves you susceptible to certain counters. So let's say you prep to be ready for curl routes or out routes. Your corner might jump either of those routes, but in doing so, he might also get baited on a stop and go or an out and up. And then if you prep outside runs, your defense will crash hard in the direction the run initially goes, but will be more susceptible to counter runs. But that kind of thing is one of those, like I mentioned at the beginning, where we start to get into a more down the road type thing. And I wanted to stay away from those kind of things, but it was on my mind, so I did want to mention it. But I think that's going to do it. I'm pretty sure I said the same thing in the scouting wish list video, but obviously there's a ton more that could be done here. I didn't get too much into the perks, but that's something that I believe could have endless possibilities. But with this video and with something this expansive, I just kind of wanted to go over the groundwork or something that I thought could be possible in a yearly cycle and that could be built on moving forward. But let me know what you guys thought of this. I was really worried that it was going to be all over the place, but when I was writing it up, it did seem to be a bit more cohesive than I was expecting. But like I said, let me know your thoughts and what kind of perks or skills you'd like to see coaches have if this was implemented into the game. Once again, I want to apologize for it taking this long to get this out, but hopefully it was worth the wait. I appreciate your guys' patience and for tuning in. Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, thanks for watching.